Hello, my name is Clayton Fowler Dietrich, and I did my presentation on meditation, and more specifically, the uh, different mechanisms that we see in the brain that are involved in the practice of meditation, and also looking at how these practices and these specific neural effects can be used to improve our lives. So, big question, what is meditation? It's a very broad question with an equally broad answer. Um, it has been described as the profound and extended contemplation or reflection in order to achieve focused attention or an otherwise altered state of consciousness and to gain insight into oneself and the world. Again, quite a broad definition, um, but it is quite a broad subject um, that can have many, many different general and specific effects, and it's really quite fascinating. The word dhyana is derived from Sanskrit, and that means contemplation and meditation, concentrating the mind and intellect while identifying with the soul. It can, again, be used to develop concentration. And I'm personally a fan of the idea of the capacity of developing a one-pointed mind, um, something that in my own practice I've found to be quite a profound and effective tool. Again, it's very difficult to define. It can be a focus of stillness. You can be focusing on your breath. You can be focusing on various forms of movement, such as dance. Playing music can be a very meditative practice. People have been using chanting, various types of gazing meditation. Essentially, it's just focused attention. Um, and this attention can be focused down to a very fine point, or it can be expanded out to a broader field of awareness than what we normally practice. And in my experience, practicing one usually enhances the other, and it's this dynamic, elegant process once you get into it. So, what are the origins of meditation? Um, that's again a very broad question. As long as there has been mind, whether it's human or animal, um, as meditation is simply focused attention, um, any anything that requires attention is some form of meditation. Um, so as long as humans have been humans, we've been focusing on the hunt, we've been focusing on a mate, we've been focusing on the fire, we've been focusing on the stars, we've been focusing on our own thoughts so that we can think creatively, solve problems, create tools, create art. Um, as long as mind has existed, I believe meditation has existed. But again, your definition of meditation will dictate your consideration of the origins of meditation. Um, so some have considered or have contemplated the idea that fireside meditative group rituals, as far back as 200,000 years ago, could have actually been essential in our development as humans. Human beings have been using various shamanic rituals. It's a very broad term that in today's world we use um, as a blanket term. Um, but the idea of having a guide, whether it's through the use of chanting or drumming or moving your body or breathing or using various mind altering substances in tandem with these guided meditative practices, humans have been doing this for eons and eons. The earliest written records of meditation that we're aware of come from around 1500 BC in the form of the Hindu Vedas. So there are, as we've said, various forms of meditation, countless forms of meditation. I'm sure many lost to time, but there are some that are more popular today, particularly in the West and the society that's most relevant to us at the moment. You can see here David Lynch was a massive proponent of transcendental meditation, as were the Beatles back in the day. It's also touch on Vipassana meditation. um, which is uh, ultimately striving to see reality as it is. Um, there are popular Vipassana meditation retreats where people will go for 10 days often, and they will spend 8 to 10 hours a day over the course of these 10 days in silent meditation. Um, and it can be a very intensive process, but people do report some extremely profound um, insights and experiences through these processes. Transcendental meditation, as I mentioned, yoga, um, again, several forms of yoga, none of which I am an expert on, um, but this, focused attention on the body and the breath, and pairing that focused attention with um, various postural states, um, and using different postural states can actually be a, a way of focusing the mind in specific ways. Um, yeah, very interesting. Simple walking meditations. Um, there are loving kindness meditations. These often involve visualization practices or directing compassion, love, kindness to yourself, to people around you, to specific individuals or groups of people. And there are so many, many more. So the brain is an attention machine, essentially, among many other things. But one huge aspect in terms of especially our conscious experience, the brain is a meditation machine. So consciously meditating is basically learning how to operate the machine more effectively. So there are several unconscious drivers of attention, things that we don't necessarily choose but do undeniably drive our attention, like hunger and thirst, and sexual desire, and physical comfort, safety, chemical dependence, on drugs, alcohol. I mean, that could also be considered like food, sex, um, even different emotional states. We could consider that a chemical dependence because we are depending on these neurochemical networks in our brain that even if they're not necessarily comfortable or productive, I think we often find the familiarity of certain emotional, psychological, behavioral states kind of get drawn back into them, into these ruts that we develop over time. Um, yeah. So through meditation, we can make an effort to transcend these unconscious drivers of our attention. Obviously, we need to continue to eat. Uh, there's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with imbibing in some mind-altering substances. It's when these things start to drive our attention against our own will that it can cause problems. So meditating can allow us to recognize these patterns and override them in a way that can give us a greater sense of autonomy, control over our lives, um, and really empower us to either heal or change or um, you know make productive action toward our goals. So it's a lot of talk, but where's the actual proof other than the anecdotal experience? It's only in recent times have we been able to actually objectively observe what's going on in the brain um, while people are meditating. So something you'll hear talked about a lot in terms of in the meditation discussion is the default mode network. So this is a network in the brain that is often lit up when we are not really focused on anything in particular, when we're just allowing our minds to wander, daydreaming, rumination, um, and we see an overactivity in this network in people that have major depressive disorder and various depression diagnoses often correlate to a hyperactive default mode network. And a core component of that network is the posterior cingulate cortex, which is a region deep inside our brains. So the relatively new technology of real-time functional magnetic resonance imaging technology, a study that they performed, they were able to observe that um, So they hooked up all these electrodes to experienced meditators and then inexperienced meditation naive individuals, um, and they focused their instruments on the posterior cingulate cortex, and they were able to chart the activity in that brain region in real time as these individuals meditated. And so they realized that the experienced meditators could, in real time, correlate the way that they were feeling to activity and changes in the graph representing PCC activity. And experienced meditators also had a greater ability to control activity in the PCC than the control group of non-meditators. Another study was looking at the ability of meditation practice to curb impulsive behavior, um, substance abuse issues, particularly with how it relates to PTSD symptoms. And as you can see here, it says that the participants that practiced the Vipassana meditation um, had massively reduced substance use than the treatment as usual control group, regardless of the severity of their PTSD symptoms. So that's quite profound. That regardless of how intense somebody's trauma was, through this meditation practice, they were able to curb the negative impulsive behaviors that were often used as a coping mechanism to deal with the trauma. So another study was working with individuals that had abnormal levels of impulsive behavior. And so they were taken through a 4-week mindfulness-based intervention training. The control group, again, continued with treatment as usual. And the mindfulness-based group displayed massive changes in their ability to tolerate stress. And they also displayed a greater connectivity between brain regions that are associated with the capacity to control impulses. So again, that's quite profound. That is, presents a very cost-effective means of helping people to deal with these impulsive behaviors that can lead to all sorts of problems in their life. Just a matter of how do we popularize these ideas and really encourage people that they actually work. Because if you don't believe that something's going to work for you, especially something that is, that you're doing on your own with your own mind, I don't think it will be as effective. So I think that that's something we really need to work on is um, encouraging people through science, because that's what many of us rely on to be able to buy into something. Uh, but to, yeah, popularize these ideas in these studies that show that it really does work. So what if you're not somebody that is particularly unwell, not mentally ill, you don't have impulsivity control issues? Um, is meditation still something that can benefit you? So one thing that we see in highly creative individuals is that they display really high alpha brainwave states. So these are states that are reflected by experienced meditators. And these are states in which people tend to experience a great deal of mental clarity and energy. Obviously, this would contribute to high creative functioning. Um, and to further that point, there's a comparative study between people that were trained in creative thinking and meditators, and they both showed similar brain activity. They had a reduced activity in the frontal lobe, um, and they had increased connectivity within brain hemispheres and between the brain hemispheres. So we're basically just seeing a more connected brain in general, which allows the people to relate ideas to each other that normally wouldn't be related to each other, and this massively expands our capacity to form new connections between ideas and think creatively. So these are all like quite specific changes that we see meditation bringing about. But what about like a more general shift in our perception of our life, of the universe, of ourselves? Um, we hear ideas of like enlightenment and transcendence and Zen, and What does that actually mean? So we typically perceive our reality in dualities as self and other, or good and bad, or the internal and the external environment. And obviously, this makes intuitive sense to us. Um, and this perception can be correlated to the intrinsic, which is the default mode network that we mentioned earlier, the mind wandering, and the extrinsic neural networks. The extrinsic one is one that's engaged more focused on a specific task, intrinsic being the one where we're more mind wandering. Um, and so there are several meditation practices that are focused on non-duality, such as Dzogchen, Mahamudra in Tibetan Buddhism, and Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism. And these practices, the philosophers that practice these types of meditation suggest that life is not an inherently dual reality, that it can be advantageous for us to perceive things, to break things down into this duality, but that there is this fundamental underlying unity that is not just an idea, but something that through meditation we can actually experience, and this can have a profound effect on the way that we relate to ourselves and the world. Um, yeah, and I think that's worth investigating. So again, the extrinsic and intrinsic networks, we discussed this. They're usually not observed being active at the same time, but when scanning the brains of practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism, we have seen these two networks hyperactive together at the same time, which is quite profound. The idea that, like, at least for me, I think that I've experienced this to my own degree, but um, still, like, I must wonder what somebody that has been meditating, for tens of thousands of hours, have devoted their life to this, what that actual experience must be like. Um, to experience a harmonized, like, state of consciousness that is beyond what most people know, or have ever known, and that just fascinates me, and drives me to strive to attain that more, and integrate it more into my daily life. So yeah, these brain states just reflect more of an experience of harmony and oneness with reality. And another way that we can get a sense of how meditation can help to establish this division of boundary and happiness through that sense of harmony. Um, there is a study published by Michael Dembrun in 2016, where these body scan meditations, uh, and these meditations actually increased the sense of selflessness of the practitioners. It decreased, so the salience of body boundaries, so decreased, like the idea of um, a sensory deprivation chamber. You go in and the water temperature is just right, and you float, and there's no sound and there's no light. That eventually your sense of your body starts to dissolve, and all that's left is your awareness, is that observer, is that consciousness. And these experiences that people had with these body scan meditations, and I can support through my own experience, lead to decreased anxiety and an increased sense of happiness. So all of these things seem to correlate. So in review, we've seen that meditation has been a part of who we are for as long as we've been what we are. That it can help, in some acute ways like attenuating depression, substance use disorders, impulsivity, anxiety. That it can help us think more creatively and more clearly. It can help us problem solve in a world where, there's more and more technology and more awareness through our technology. We are able to recognize that there are so many problems out there that need to be solved, and through creative and clear minds, these problems, we have a better chance of solving these problems. Um, and it can just help us develop a major shift in the way that we perceive reality. We stop seeing ourselves as separate from nature, as separate from our community, as separate from our families, as that we are a part of this, like, incredible, for lack of a better word, like miraculous conscious experience. The fact that we even exist is absolutely mind-boggling, and to uh, be able to actually experience it, not just contemplate it, but really experience this oneness, I think can lead to a profound shift in the way that we relate to our world and our capacity to integrate into our world and solve the problems that we currently face in our world. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, the actual personal experience of it is what it's all about. And so I hope that anybody that is listening to this has been encouraged to try meditation and realize that there's no one way to do it. Yeah. Thank you for listening.